He used his own key. The lock turned, and still, someone called it trespassing. It wasn't a dramatic entrance. No broken glass, no blaring alarm, just a late-night return to a quiet building. Lumen Lofts slept softly at that hour, a mid-rise with polished concrete floors and an elevator that complained every time it climbed. In the lobby, a key fob blinked green. On the third floor, a door recognized a code it had seen 100 times before. But one pair of suspicious eyes turned a normal night into something else. A phone call, a concern, and a question no one wants at their own front door. Do you live here? It started with a key that worked, and a neighbor who decided it shouldn't. It was 11:43 p.m. when Darius Cole walked into the Lumen Lofts lobby with 2 paper bags and a small cardboard box balanced on top. He'd pulled a long shift at the studio, refining a product mock-up and arguing about pixels no one else would notice. He'd stopped for brioche and eggs at an all-night market because his roommate had a shoot at sunrise. The box, just a courtesy, was a package for his upstairs neighbor, the one who always missed deliveries and left polite notes in the elevator asking for help. The lobby was empty except for the hum of a vending machine and the glint of polished steel. Darius tapped his fob, listened for the click, and stepped inside. The camera above the door winked red, the usual confirmation. It didn't feel like a moment that would be replayed, paused, and dissected. From the mailroom window, Whitney Pike watched. She was sorting envelopes into a neat stack, lips tight, eyes flicking over every movement. Whitney had built a reputation as the floor's eyes, the one who reminded people to wipe down the gym equipment and wrote emails about hallway clutter as if it were a civic duty. She didn't recognize Darius with his beanie pulled down and the collar of his jacket raised against the cold. She also didn't try. "Hey," she said as he passed, voice sounding friendly but strained. "Who are you here to see?" Darius glanced up, adjusted the box, and offered a quick smile. "I live here. 3B. Whitney nodded without nodding. "New?" "No. Been about 8 months," he said, and pressed the elevator button. The screen glowed up from his hands, a text to Mateo telling him he'd picked up the groceries. The elevator indicator crept down from 6 to 5. "And the package?" Whitney asked. 4E, he said. "I told Jenna I'd grab it if I saw it. She keeps missing the driver." The elevator arrived and swallowed him whole. As the doors slid shut, he heard her voice again, flattened and official now. "Security? Hi, it's Whitney in 2C. There's a man in a beanie-tailing residence, I think. He's checking doors. Can you send someone?" The elevator car rose with its usual groan. Darius exhaled, not yet knowing the call would chase him up the shaft. By the time the doors opened on the 3rd floor, a uniform was already on the way. The elevator doors parted, and a broad chest filled the gap. Doyle Briggs wore a navy jacket with the building's patch on one arm and a flashlight on the other. He didn't step back. He didn't smile. "Evening," Doyle said, holding out a hand like a stop sign. "I need to see your ID." Darius shifted the bags to one hand and fumbled for his wallet. "Sure," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "I live in 3B. He pointed down the hall. "Right there." "ID first," Doyle said. His eyes were flat, his posture firm, like both were memorized from a training manual. Darius pulled his driver's license free, turned it toward the light. Doyle glanced, then shook his head. "Need proof of residency." Darius huffed a breath, trying to laugh at a situation that wasn't funny. "Okay," he said. "I have mail with my name. Lease is digital, but I can open it." He had done this before, on move-in day, with a different guard who'd been apologetic. He set the grocery bags down, keyed in the code on his door, and the lock chirped the sweet sound of familiarity. He swung the door open. "This is my place," he said. "You can see the couch. Mateo?" From the living room, his roommate called back, Yeah? Somewhere in the apartment, a kettle clicked. Doyle's hand didn't lower. Sir, I need you to step back into the hallway. Someone reported unusual entry. Until I verify, you can't go in. Darius paused with one foot over the threshold. The logic broke like cheap glass. I can't go into my apartment to get proof that I live in my apartment? Policy, Doyle said, and the word landed like a gavel. Darius kept the door open with his shoulder, reached for an envelope on the console table, and held it up. His name, his unit number, the building's logo in the corner. This is me, he said, a half-smile that was more exhaustion than friendliness. You're hearing my roommate. My code opened the door. Are we good? Not until I radio it in, Doyle said. We had a complaint. He didn't say from whom. He didn't have to. Darius could hear a voice in the air, a tone he'd learned to recognize. The kind that sounds sorry right up until it isn't. He pulled the door wide and let Doyle look. Rugs, shoes, a print on the wall that Mateo had picked up at a thrift store. It all seemed to exist for the guard's permission. The kettle whistled, footsteps, and another voice, calm and practiced, echoed from down the hall. Let's all take a step back. Another uniform had arrived, this one a badge with authority to end it or let it simmer. The hallway had just become a stage, and the words were about to get recorded. Phones were out before the questions were. It's a reflex now. When Sergeant Rowan Keller turned the corner, one of the neighbors across the hall cracked their door just enough for a camera lens to peek through. In the living room, Mateo had already pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over record. He knew the rule. When someone questions the reality of your life, document it. Evening, Keller said, voice low, slow, and practiced for tense rooms. Let's keep voices even. Sir, can you step into the hallway where I can see both of you? Safety. Darius swallowed, grit in his throat. Safety. Am I detained? He asked, a line he hated to say but felt required to use. No, Keller replied. Just need to see proof of residency. We got a call about a possible trespass. We're going to clear it and go. Darius stepped back into the hallway and held out the mail. He opened his phone, scrolled, found the lease renewal with his name and 3B stamped across the top, and offered it up. He kept his voice steady. I'm Darius Cole. Been here 8 months. This is my lease. That's my door, my code, my roommate. My groceries are melting. Mateo angled the camera to show the open apartment behind them, calling out, Sergeant, you're on speaker with my landlord, because he'd called the after-hours number the minute the question started. The automated voice said the line was being recorded. Everything was. Keller nodded at the mail and at the license. Doyle hovered, radio held against his shoulder. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaner and boiled water. Who made the complaint? Darius asked, eyes flicking to the cracked door across the way. No one answered. No one had to. Sir, can I ask you to lower your voice? Doyle said, though Darius hadn't raised it. The minutes stretched. Keller asked for the leasing office's email. Darius pulled up receipts for the deposit he'd paid 2 weeks earlier for the renewal. He displayed the timestamp of the e-signature, the proof piled up like bricks. And still, policy wanted to be fed. The first clip that went viral was messy. City Beat Northline, a neighborhood blog that lived for conflict, posted a 30-second video spliced from Mateo's recording and the neighbor's hallway footage. It started with Keller's step into the hallway and cut to Darius saying, Am I detained? Then it jumped to the guard blocking the doorway as the beeping sound of the lock repeated. It made the whole thing feel like a loop, a trap that reset no matter what. The comment sections lit up. Some people saw a system working, complaints taken seriously, IDs checked, everyone heading to bed. Others saw a scene that felt too familiar, a black resident with a key, a lease, a home, still treated like the stranger in the room. Friends of friends shared the clip with captions like, I felt this in my bones, and imagine this is your house. Opponents called it out of context. Supporters said context was the problem. The video was loud. It was also incomplete. In the background, a different story was unfolding in slow, irritating steps. Paperwork should have snapped this shut. Instead, it made a new mess. Paperwork should have ended it. Instead, it got weird. Not an hour after the encounter, an email landed in the police department's shared inbox. It came from the property manager, Elaine Mercer, and it was written in perfect office politeness. "We are currently reviewing Unit 3B's renewal documentation," it said, "and there may be discrepancies due to a new e-sign platform. Until confirmed, please request additional verification for this unit." It sounded harmless, procedural. It did not say, "Please make this resident prove their life on the threshold of his own door." Darius read that email later because someone leaked it. Screenshot, subject line, timestamp. He sat on the couch with the groceries put away and a headache rising, and his mouth fell open like he'd been slapped. "Renewal discrepancies?" he asked the heir. "We signed 2 weeks ago." He had the receipts, all of them. Screenshots of bank transfers, email confirmations from the leasing portal, a PDF with the leasing office's digital initials stamped on every page. A resident messaging thread, polite, friendly, where Elaine herself had said, "Welcome back for another year." Mateo compiled it all in a folder with labeled subfolders like he was producing a documentary. Receipts, leasing portal screenshots, text confirmations, calendar entries where they'd scheduled the meeting to review the unit. He wasn't being dramatic. He was being precise. He posted a second video that night. This one, a quiet run-through of the paper trail. Here's the lease. Here's the bank transfer. Here's the welcome back email. People tagged each other in the comments. This part was left out. Where's this in the first clip? Why didn't policy care about the actual proof? Meanwhile, in the building, whispers multiplied. Rumors suggest Lumen Lofts had a pattern of documentation hiccups that always seemed to show up when someone pushed back on how they were treated. Reports claim at least 3 residents had their lease files misplaced after complaining to management about security. Nothing verified. No solid evidence provided. The stories also said those mistakes were cleanly fixed once the heat died down. No explanation given. 2 versions of the truth were now on the table. One said this was a simple verification request. The other said someone was turning a clean record into confusion by choice. People argued about which was more believable. Then, an audio file landed in the wild, and the tone of the fight shifted. The words weren't loud, but they said a lot. Someone filed a public records request. The 911 call from Whitney reached the light of day. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She just painted a picture that made sense to the person on the other end of the line. "Yeah, hi," her voice said, low and clipped. "There's a man in the lobby tailing residents. Hood up. Looks like he's checking doors. I think he's trying to get in with someone else." On the screen, CityBeat overlaid the lobby footage taken from the building's camera, a clip someone must have leaked, and placed it next to Whitney's words. The man in question was Darius. He didn't have a hood up. He wore a beanie. He didn't tail anyone. He walked alone. He didn't check doors. He tapped a key fob he had paid to activate and pushed a door he had a right to open. The video and the audio did not match. The mismatch did more than irritate. It felt calculated, even if it wasn't. Darius sat at the table listening to the call, shoulders tight. He could hear in Whitney's tone a kind of practiced calm, the kind that sits on top of fear like a lid. No names, no descriptions beyond hood up. Nothing that could be called a slur. Just the careful language of suspicion that still lands the same way. It's been said that on the night in question, a residents' group chat traded photos of suspicious faces spotted in the lobby. Those screenshots never surfaced. No one would share the chat logs. Friends told reporters off the record that nothing like that happened. Others claimed screenshots existed but were being kept private for fear of litigation. Nothing verified. No proof. But even the rumor made the building feel smaller, tighter, like it was watching itself and failing. Darius's phone buzzed with texts from friends. Some said, "You okay?" Others said, "I've been there." A few said, "I would have lost it." He hadn't lost it. He'd stood in a hallway and made his life into a presentation. He had not yelled. He had not cursed. He had not slammed the door. He had done everything the right way while someone else described him the wrong way. Across town, in a coffee shop where laptops were open like shields, people played the clip on repeat. They shared it in group chats with captions like, "This is what we mean by coded." The word meant a lot of things. In this case, it meant someone could describe a real person like a threat without using any language that would get them called out for it. It meant the right words could make wrong assumptions sound civil. If bias had made the call, policy had to choose how it reacted. What happened next would show where the building stood. Rules are supposed to protect residents, so why did they trap one? The building's website was neat and clean, filled with glossy photos and bullet points about amenities. It also had a line about enhanced resident safety through community partnership. No one quite knew what that meant until Doyle explained what he'd been told to do. After 10 p.m., if a complaint came in, verify IDs on the spot. He called it a verbal directive. He could not produce a memo. He could not find an email. He swore he'd been reminded at the start of the month to be extra vigilant. Darius blinked. "Extra vigilant about what?" he asked. The line hung there, unanswered. The building's property manager, Elaine, issued a statement that sounded like it had been polished by a dozen hands. "We are committed to the safety and dignity of all residents. Our security partners are trained to respond to complaints promptly and professionally. We are reviewing protocol to ensure best practices are followed." It was the kind of sentence that said a lot and nothing at once. Meanwhile, residents filled in the blanks. Some claimed there had been a break-in months earlier. No details given, no police report linked, just a floating story about a bicycle stolen from the garage and the vague "they" who took it. Others insisted nothing happened. They said management had used rumors to justify more aggressive checks after receiving noise complaints about weekend parties. The truth wobbled like a table with a bad leg. Internal rumors claimed Doyle had been written up twice for overstepping. One incident where he had questioned a resident while they unloaded furniture from their own truck, another when he demanded ID from a delivery driver in a way that sparked a complaint. None of those reports were public. None of that was verified. But human resources in a building like this rarely is transparent, and people fill silence with stories, policy or prejudice. The line blurred when someone complained became sufficient cause. A phone call could open the door to scrutiny, while a lease and a key fob somehow weren't enough to close it. People argued about what the guard had to do versus what he chose to do. They argued about what the sergeant was required to say versus what empathy might have suggested. Opinion flowed like water, found any crack to fill. Then came a data point that wouldn't sit still. It had numbers in it, and numbers usually behave. These didn't, or someone pretended they didn't. Numbers don't care about feelings unless someone edits them. Key fobs leave trails. Every beep in the lobby, every click on a stairwell door, every time an elevator responds to a chip, the system writes it down. In buildings like Lumen Lofts, those logs are clean. Time, date, fob ID, success or failure. The night in question should have shown Darius's fob hitting the lobby, then the third floor, then his unit. Straightforward. At first, that's exactly what appeared. Darius's attorney friend, because everyone knows a lawyer in their extended group, filed a request for the access logs related to 3B. The file came back with timestamps that matched his walk home. 11:43 p.m., lobby entry, success. 11:44, third floor door, success. 11:45, unit entry, code accepted. It read like a boring itinerary. It was perfect. Then a second set of logs surfaced. They came from a different source, an internal export someone shared with CityBeat, and those times told a different story. The lobby entry from 1143 was missing. In its place, no lobby activity recorded for FOB 3B21-000. The third floor entry stayed. The unit code remained. The result was a ghost. How had he reached the third floor without ever entering the building? The contradiction set off alarm bells. Reports claim an employee toggled a temporary freeze on Darius's fob earlier that day due to a system bug and then reversed it, leaving a gap where records should have been. Rumors suggest someone realized after the fact that the gap made Darius's presence look off and tried to backfill it, badly. None of that was verified. The building offered no technical explanation that held water. Tech-savvy residents said the system could create an audit trail for any change. If it did, no one shared it. In a quiet corner of the internet, a thread of people who install these systems for a living dissected the screenshots. Half argued incompetence, the other half saw intent. "A freeze like that generates a flag," one wrote. "You can't make it disappear." Another countered, "Depends on the build. Smaller outfits leave back doors." Darius looked at the mess and felt a hot mix of anger and exhaustion. He carried proof, again, that he belonged where he was. He now also carried proof that someone, somewhere, played with records that shouldn't be touched. The second clip Mateo posted walked through the logs calmly, showed them side by side, asked a question, and refused to answer it. Why are there two versions of the same night? Pressure has a way of forcing apologies, or of encouraging people to cover their tracks. The building needed to choose one. It chose the easier one first. They said sorry. The internet said, try again. 3 days after the first clip went viral, Lumen Lofts posted a statement. It apologized to Darius by name. It recognized his experience as distressing. It announced Doyle had been suspended pending review. It said the building was engaging a third-party consultant to review security procedures and partnering with community leaders for training. It did not reference the email about renewal discrepancies. It did not address the disappearing lobby log. It did not explain who had made the complaint or what had been said. It asked for privacy while they completed the process. Darius read it twice and felt nothing. Not relief, not vindication, just a space where something should have been. He had lost sleep. He had lost time at work. He had spent hours pulling documents he had already provided months ago. He had watched a video of himself on the internet framed as both a victim and a manipulator, depending on who you asked. He had fielded messages from strangers promising support he didn't want and advice he didn't ask for. An apology on letterhead felt thin. Mateo posted the full recording from start to finish. No splices, no captions. It showed Darius being asked to stand in the hallway by a calm voice and a rigid policy. It showed a guard insisting the door be proof and then refusing the door as proof. It showed a resident across the hall filming through a crack while not offering to help. It showed the groceries sweating on the floor. It showed a life reduced to evidence. Rumors suggest the building offered Darius a quiet payout in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. Reports claim he turned it down, preferring transparency over a check. None of that is verified. No document surfaced. But the idea of it fit neatly into the way this place felt. A glossy exterior, a willingness to smooth out rough edges if you signed on the dotted line. Darius returned to work and tried to pretend this was background noise. It wasn't. He was short with a client. He forgot a meeting. He woke up at 3 a.m., hearing a knock that hadn't happened. He hated that this lived in his body now, that his door, had become a question mark. The apology landed. The discourse churned. People moved on to the next thing because that's what people do. But Darius was not finished. He hadn't chosen any of this, but he could choose what he did next. And that decision was not about going viral. It was about making sure that no one else had to turn their home into a courtroom to prove they belonged. He had one more move. There are two kinds of aftermath. the kind that fizzles and the kind that builds. Darius refused to let this fizzle. He reached out to a renter advocacy forum that met once a month in the back of a community center that still smelled like paint from school plays. He didn't want a protest. He wanted a process. He showed up with his folder, the one with tabs and labels and a numbering system only he and Mateo understood. And he asked for something simple: transparency and structure that couldn't be bent by fear. He proposed a public-facing summary of complaints, stripped of names, scrubbed of details that would violate privacy, but clear about what kinds of calls were made and how they were resolved. If someone says a resident doesn't belong, he said, we should know what's behind that. Did someone see something real? Or did they see a feeling they couldn't name and call it danger? He asked the building to formalize the so-called verbal directive. If you're going to check IDs after 10 p.m., write it down, he said. Send it to everyone. Let the community discuss it. Let it be debated. Hidden rules aren't rules. They're excuses. He asked for access logs to be handled like what they were: records. If there's a freeze, he said, write why and when. Keep an audit trail. Make messing with it as serious as entering someone's home without permission. He didn't go alone. Other residents came. Some who knew the taste of that hallway fear, others who didn't but understood how quickly it could be theirs. They brought stories. A woman from 5A who said a guard had asked her boyfriend for ID every time he visited. A man from 2E who admitted he once called security because he didn't recognize a neighbor and still felt ashamed of it months later. People were honest in ways they hadn't been online. The building didn't transform overnight. It rarely works like that. But it agreed to a few things right away. A third-party audit of the access system, quarterly reports about categories of complaints, a commitment to on-call decision-making that didn't leave guards alone in a hallway to enforce a policy they couldn't point to on paper. Darius didn't want the spotlight. He wanted clarity. He wanted to walk into his lobby at midnight and think about nothing but whether he'd remembered to buy coffee filters. He wanted his neighbor to pick up her own packages. He wanted Whitney to understand that watching people is not the same as keeping them safe. For her part, Whitney sent a note. Not a public post, not a PR-crafted message. A handwritten card slipped under his door. I believed I was protecting our building, it said. I see now I did the opposite. I'm sorry. It was not an absolution. It was a start. It was also specific. She named exactly what she'd gotten wrong. The hood that wasn't a hood. The assumption that a stranger needed a host. The lie the brain tells when it wants to be right more than it wants to be kind. People asked Darius if he'd forgive her. He said, that's not what this is about. He wasn't interested in absolving anyone. He was interested in changing what could be changed. It sounded small. It wasn't. The bigger picture is simple and hard at the same time. Home should be the safest place. If a key and a lease aren't enough, then what is? A smile? A certain outfit? A voice trained never to sound angry, even when anger is the sane response. That's not safety. That's performance. This story began with a working lock and a stranger's doubt. It ran through emails that said one thing and did another, a recording that didn't match the truth, and records that didn't agree with themselves. It ended, not with a sweeping victory, but with an insistence on the basics. Write down the rules, make them fair, make them known. And when someone calls for help, teach them to ask a better question. What am I really seeing, and what am I assuming? Because tonight, it was Darius in that hallway, making a list of his own life for someone else's approval. Tomorrow, it could be anyone with the wrong key in someone else's imagination. And until that changes, the rest of us have a choice. We can repeat the script that turned a beanie into a hood, a key into a suspicion, a home into a proving ground. Or we can stop, step back, and decide that doubt is not policy. The last thing Darius did before going to bed that week was hang a small piece of paper inside his front door. Not a manifesto, not a set of rules, just a reminder to himself, written in calm ink. You belong here. It wasn't permission. It was a fact. And facts don't need to be verified at your own door. Follow-through is boring and brilliant. 2 months later, the building sent out its first quarterly report. It was plain, borderline ugly, the kind of PDF no one clicks unless they mean it. It listed complaints, noise, packages, lost keys, suspicious person. For the first time, residents could see the numbers. Suspicious person had been the top complaint for 2 years. After the new guidelines, it dropped. Not to 0, this is the real world, but enough to notice. Enough to say something had changed. The access system audit came back with recommendations and embarrassing notes. A technician wrote in unvarnished language that anyone toggling freezes should be trained, logged, and if necessary, replaced. Someone's job title quietly shifted. No one announced a firing, no one cheered. There was no victory lap. But the logs stopped contradicting themselves. The system got boring again, the way a lock is supposed to be. Doyle's suspension ended with a reassignment to a different site. Reports claim he requested it. Rumors suggest it was strongly suggested to him. Nothing verified. He wasn't the villain in Darius's story, just a man who followed a rule too hard when what was needed was a little common sense. He might learn something from this, or he might not. That part wasn't Darius's job anymore. Elaine held a town hall in the lobby, which meant folding chairs and bad coffee and the awkwardness of corporate language trying to sound human. She said the wrong thing twice and the right thing once. "We messed up," she said. "We'll document better. We'll communicate better. You deserve that." It wasn't inspirational. It didn't need to be. Whitney showed up and sat in the back. She didn't speak. She took notes. People glanced her way and then looked away. Everyone was a little embarrassed in a way that might lead to better habits. Sometimes, that's the most useful outcome you get. As for City Beat Northline, they moved on, as blogs do. But an editor reached out months later and asked Darius if he wanted to write a piece. He said no. Then he said yes. He wrote 800 words titled, "After the Video," and it wasn't a call-out. It was an instruction manual. "If you're a neighbor," he wrote, "assume the person with the key lives there. If you're security, make sure your rules exist on paper. If you're management, treat logs like truth, not clay. If you're the one in the hallway, record, stay steady, then rest your voice. You don't owe anyone a perfect performance in your own doorway." He didn't use the word shocking. He didn't say exposed or uncovered. He wrote it like he was talking to a friend, because that's how he wanted to be addressed in the first place. When the sun finally set on the whole thing, Lumen Lofts looked the same from the street. Smooth, tall, a little smug. Inside, something had shifted a few inches towards sense. Not enough to celebrate, enough to notice. And sometimes that's the beginning. Not a clip, not a scandal, just a building with better habits because one man refused to turn his life into rumor and let it be. He didn't need a headline. He needed a hallway that felt like his. He has it now, most nights. The kettle still clicks. The elevator still groans. And the door opens for the person who belongs behind it without anyone having to ask him to prove it.